In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. I'll tell you about first, maybe this will be the only one. Maybe we'll talk about both of them. Two readings. But the first reading I want to talk to you about is the reading for tomorrow. Tomorrow. Why am I reading the reading for tomorrow today? Does anybody know? You know what day this is in the church calendar? It's August 31st in the church calendar. So what's the next day tomorrow in the church calendar?
New Year's?
Yeah, it's New Year. It's September 1st. So when you have certain feasts, and I think it's important to know, maybe none of you will ever be readers or in the choir, but you should know these things. We should know things about the way the church does things. So when you have a feast coming up, let's say the next day, that is very important, it has its own readings. So whatever reading would have been done on that day in the normal time, it doesn't get read. The church says, well, that's not good just to skip it. So it's usually read the day before. It can sometimes be read the day after, but usually the day before it's read. So we're reading the reading for today, which is Wednesday, and the reading for tomorrow, which is Thursday. And then tomorrow is the so-called indiction, which is the church New Year. And it has its own readings. You didn't know that for us, New Year is September 1st. Did you know that? You're going to stay up and watch the ball drop? You're going to do fireworks? I suppose in some countries they probably do fireworks, I'll bet you. I think some people want to have any excuse whatsoever to do fireworks. Okay, so let's talk about the feeding of the 5,000. How many fish were used to feed 5,000 people? 2. Yeah, how big do you think they were?
Small.
Yeah, they were little like this, right? Were they fresh fish? No, they were probably salted fish, or they could have been smoked, right? So they were not fresh fish. Could you carry fresh fish around in the desert for very long? You know what you'd smell like if you did that? Dead fish. That's what you'd smell like. So no, it was probably smoked fish, or it could have been salted. And then they also had how much bread? 5. Do you know what kind of bread it was?
Lichia bread.
It was lichia bread. Well, I suppose they might have made lichia bread out of that bread. It might have been. What grain was used for it? Do you know? Wheat, corn?
Wasn't it barley?
Barley. It was barley bread. Barley is actually very, very healthy, lots of protein, and the loaves were really small little loaves. So how many people do you think you could feed with 5 little loaves like this big and 2 small fish about this big? Could you feed your family for dinner? No, your family's too big, isn't it? Everybody would be really, really hungry afterwards, right? 4 or 5 people at the most, right? Yeah, maybe. Everybody gets one little tiny loaf of bread and like a half of the fish, and they'd still be super hungry, wouldn't they? Right? And yet 5 loaves and 2 fish fed 5,000 men. Now there were women and children there too, so who knows how many people were there. Maybe 20,000, 25,000, that's a lot of people. A real lot of people. So let's read about this and see why does it matter that it was put in the Bible? Like, it's there in the Bible, it must be important. I wonder what it can teach us. So the apostles were gathered together to Jesus, and they related to him all things as much as they did and as much as they taught. So this is after Jesus has sent them out 2 by 2 to teach, preach, to heal. He sent them out all by themselves, just 2 at a time. And they went and preached to all kinds of people. And they healed people. And they came back, and you think they were excited? I would think so, don't you think? If you do something that's really neat, don't you want to go and tell your mom and dad? Don't you? Sure, they wanted to tell Jesus all the exciting things that had happened. Right? So they tell him all these things, and then he realizes, well, he already knows this, they were tired. They needed a little rest. Or that's what he said. Maybe he didn't intend that they were going to rest anyway, because it doesn't look like they got the rest. So he says to them, why don't you just come yourselves privately to a little desolate place? You know what desolate means? Yeah, it can be quiet. Desolate means like it's really far away from people, really remote. And often, sometimes it means that there's hardly anything growing there. It's like a desert. So go privately to a desolate place and rest. So there were all these people all over them, and they didn't have any opportunity even to eat. There were so many people. So they went away by a ship privately to a desolate place. But the crowd saw them. So what did the crowds do? They followed them, yeah. Whether it was by ship or on foot. In this case, it was on foot. And they went and followed them. Why were they following him? What were they looking for? Well, yes, but what were they looking for Jesus to do? Heal them. I'd say mostly people were going because they had a friend, a relative, a mother, a father, a sister, a brother who had some terrible disease. And they wanted Jesus to heal them because they knew that he could heal them. And there were others that also loved Jesus' teaching. His teaching was so beautiful that they couldn't think of anything else that they'd want to do than listen to him teach. And he would teach for hours and hours. And he did that. He saw all these people coming, and the scripture says that Jesus saw a great crowd and was moved with compassion towards them because they were as sheep not having a shepherd. And so he began to teach them many things. I hope that you do that sort of thing as you get older, that you see someone has some need, you could be like Jesus. You see a person that has it, maybe is like a sheep without a shepherd. They need some guidance, they need some help. And you give it to them. That's a very Christian thing to do. That's what Jesus did. And that's what we all should do. Now you're little now, and mostly you get help. But when you get older, you should want to help others. That should be a very important part of your life, is to help others that need help. So Jesus was preaching to them for a long time, it says. Much time having already elapsed, his disciples came to him and said, the place is desolate and already it is a late hour. Dismiss them in order that they might go into the fields and the villages round about to buy bread for themselves. Now, what do you think? Is there anything wrong with the disciples, what they said to Jesus? What do you think? They had just come back from a trip where they had performed miracle upon miracle upon miracle, and where they had only brought just a staff and shoes and one short, and that was it. And they had no trouble with getting things to eat. They had no trouble with being able to drink. They had no trouble with finding a place to stay. All that happened, even though they were alone and without anything, without any money or anything. Then they come back and they're super excited and they tell Jesus, and then all this teaching goes on in the desert. And then they go up to Jesus and say, send them away because there's no food here. Do you think that was a good thing to say?
No.
Why not? God can do anything, can't he? But they had just seen that God had done so much for them. I'm going to give you a little secret. It is a secret, even though it's not really a secret. People treat it like a secret because they don't really remember it. So if you don't remember something, it's almost like it's a secret, right? That you don't know. The fact is that when good things happen to you, there will be temptations afterwards. Always. So the disciples had this wonderful thing happen. Can you imagine just being a regular old person, not Jesus, but being told to go out and preach to people, and you would say, in the name of Jesus, walk, and a person walks? Could you imagine having that happen? Could you imagine casting demons out? And could you imagine how wonderful that must have been? How powerful that must have seemed to them? How much they must have felt that God was protecting them, right? Then what happens? They come back to the desert, and there's all these people they need to eat, and it's a great temptation. because they don't know how to do it. Well, why didn't they just ask God? Right? Instead of saying, you send them away, they could have gone to him. Well, let's see what we could have said to them if we were people with faith. What would you say to Jesus if there was thousands of people that needed to eat? There was no food, there was no water, and they needed to eat or else they would get sick. So what would you say to Jesus? Would you say go into the towns? Tell them to go into the towns and get food. Would you say that? Or would you not say a word? Huh? Not say a word. Adi, what would you say? What would you ask Jesus?
To help them.
Thank you, Adi. To help them. Okay. I think that's a good thing to say. You could say, Jesus, all these people are hungry, and you can do anything you want. Would you feed them? And then you could also add maybe, and if you want me to do anything, I will do anything to help feed them. So, they didn't do that though, did they? They just said, send them away. And what did Jesus say? How did he answer them when they said, you send away all the people so that they can go eat? What did he tell the disciples? He didn't say no exactly. He did say no, but not in so many words. He said he wasn't going to send them away in so many words, but what did he tell them to do? Did you listen to the gospel?
He told them to. He asked them if there was any.
Well, first he said, you give them to eat. In another account, I don't think he ever asked if there was any food. Yeah, he did. He says, he said, how many loaves have you? Go and see. And then they found the 5 and the 2 fish. But first he said, you give them to eat. Could they give them to eat? Did they have the ability to multiply the fish? No, but Jesus did. So they found 5 loaves and 2 fish. Deborah loves this talking about when she does something small. She says that I will give my 5 loaves and 2 fish. Even something small that you do, something very tiny, but it's something still that's important. So it's like giving 5 loaves and 2 fish. But what happened to those 5 loaves and 2 fish? What did happen to them? They were multiplied. Exactly. So this is a very important lesson. That number one, when you have something really good happen to you, you're going to have temptations afterwards. And that we should always remember that God can always and will always provide for us. We shouldn't be so scared. And we should, when there's a problem, instead of saying something like, oh no, I don't know what to do, we should go, Jesus, there's a problem. And you know what to do. So would you tell me what to do? And would you help me? That's the story about this. That's the lesson of this story, those 2 lessons. So what were the 2 lessons I told you? You blabbermouths over here. Huh? What happens after good things happen to you? Huh? Temptation. Okay. And when there's a problem, what should you do? Ask for help. How about that from Jesus? Okay? That is the lesson, the main lesson. There's some other beautiful things here too. He had them recline in like beds in a garden. So they weren't just all like reclining, just laying all over the place. Like see people in the church right now, we're kind of, some people are sitting here, some people sitting there, But if we were all sitting in rows, it would look really pretty, wouldn't it? Huh? That's what happened. You had rows of 50 to 100 people in nice, neat rows. That would make it a lot easier to distribute the fish, don't you think? Because you just walk down the row, and hold the basket to them, and they take whatever they wanted out of the basket. And can you imagine as they're taking stuff out of the basket, it doesn't get smaller. Wouldn't that be weird? Have you ever thought what that miracle must have looked like? They're carrying a basket full of only a few fish. I mean, they began with just a tiny bit. If he gave it to all his apostles, all 12 of them, he must have given them a little tiny piece of fish and a little tiny piece of bread, right? And said, you go distribute it. They're probably thinking, what's going on here? First person is going to eat all of it. And then when they start to give it, it's still there. And then more's there. And then eventually the basket's full, and they keep giving, and the basket never gets empty. Because at the end of the eating, they had all the everything, they had the baskets full. I guess the basket probably at the end was empty, but then they had so many fragments that they filled the baskets up again. That's an amazing miracle. It would have been very interesting to see all those people in all those beautiful rows. Imagine how happy they were. They were hungry, and now they could eat. And they were saying, what's happening here? There's more and more fish. How can this be? That must have been pretty exciting. Just remember, though, that after that miracle, there would have been other temptations. And when Jesus performed this miracle, there was a great temptation. They wanted to actually try to make him king. And they also didn't really believe that he was anything special except a person who could give them food. And they wanted to conquer Rome. And the most important thing you need is an army when you're conquering is you need to be able to feed the soldiers. Soldiers who can't eat, they don't fight for you. So there's a great temptation after this. This is after this event. Jesus talked to them about that he was the bread from heaven. What's the bread from heaven? What was the original bread from heaven? You know, manna, right? And manna came down as much as they wanted to eat. And they got bored with the manna, and they got mad about the manna, and then they got in trouble for that, didn't they? They got bit by snakes and all kinds of things. But Jesus said he's the bread from heaven. Is he manna?
I think he said that he is the bread from heaven, which means that he came to tell them about God.
And he is God, isn't he? Right? So when he says he's the bread from heaven, what do we know that really means now? He later on told us explicitly what it means. What are we going to do in liturgy today? Communion. What is communion? Yes, bread and wine, which becomes the body and blood of Christ. So the bread from heaven, was manna, but it has become Jesus Christ himself. He feeds us his own body and blood. Even though we don't see it as his body and blood, he feeds us his body and blood and gives us life. So I hope you remember something from this gospel, that especially that you remember that the two things. One is that after good things comes temptations. I have a temptation today. Today I am really tired and I feel really like not doing anything. If I could, I would just sleep all day. And that's a great temptation because I got too many other things to do. My hips hurt for the first time in a long time. I think I got some gluten there somehow, even though I was careful. So it's a temptation because it was so wonderful to go out to this farm and baptize these two children. And my grandsons got to ride on a big tractor and use an excavator and all kinds of stuff. It was so much fun. And it was a beautiful time. And now I'm tired and I want to just go to sleep. That's a temptation. So the number one thing to remember is that when things come to temptation. Yes, sir. Can you touch it? I guess you can touch it, sure. Touch away. Touch away. Hold on to it. Hold on to it. And then the other thing is that when we have troubles, we shouldn't just worry. We should ask Jesus for help. How about that? And you are like the quietest I've ever heard you, which means that, according to my rule, since you're quiet now, you're going to get noisy. That's what's going to happen. All right, God bless you.